Hey, welders, ready to upgrade your gear and save some serious dough in the process? The Miller Build with Blue Savings and Rebate Program has you covered. Find amazing deals and cashback rebates on a wide range of Miller products, from welders to plasma cutters and everything in between, all backed by our 3-year warranty. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Take advantage of the Miller Build with Blue program now. Visit us online or stop by your nearest Miller distributor today to start saving.
Welcome to another episode of the Strange Motion Way podcast. I'm your host, Tim Strange, along with...
Carrie Strange.
Tonight, Carrie, I can't believe this has happened.
This is a record.
This has been the hardest. He was the first person we asked.
And he always said no.
And he always said no, because apparently there's bets in the industry between him, our other friends, Tom Opoff at Saltworks, and Eric Pratt at Pinky's. Like, let's not do Tim's podcast.
Yeah.
It's been like an on-running joke.
So this means he won. He's the winner because he is here.
Well, he's whoring us. He has a product line to talk about, so I'm fine with that.
That's fine.
So this guy right here is a Good Guys Trendsetter, Grand National Roadster Show Hall of Fame, Grand National Roadster Show Builder of the Year, Blackie's Fresno Autorama Builder of the Year, Sloniker Award winner at the Grand National Roadster Show 2 or 3 times, so many you can't keep count. The Bertolucci Award at the Sacramento Award, we think 3 times. And if you don't know what the Bertolucci Award is, it's kind of like the Sacramento version of the Sloniker. It's the fit and finish and the fine detail of it. Featured in many magazines, including Hot Rod Magazine Top 10 Cars of the Year. He's also got a couple product lines, which we're going to talk about that. That's the real reason he's on here. He's got a windshield for roadsters that he's had for a while, and his new line, he recently acquired the Street Rodders Hood Hinge Company that was formerly known as Dan Fink Hinges. And I can't say this about any of our other guests that we've had or going to have. I have actually had a nightmare sleeping on his couch and woke up and screamed like a little girl in the past. One of my best buddies, I talk to him almost every week, but we finally have Zane Cullen from Cotati Speed Shop. Welcome, Zane.
Thanks, guys.
So
quite a list.
So we got a couple magazines out here that we'll get to here. So your shop was formerly, when I met you, it was called Creative Concepts.
Yep.
You had a partner,
yep.
And then your Cotati Speed Shop for the last, how many years have you been Cotati?
Probably at least half of the 32 years, whatever now.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a midway point at this point.
So we need to back up. We need to go talk about Little Zane.
Little Zane. I know a lot about Zane because he's one of my best buddies. We talk. We're like brothers. We know each other's dark secrets. I've stayed at his house. His wife is scared the living crap out of me because she knows I don't like clowns. His wife likes to hide in the bushes and jump out at you. She's a demon. His wife, Steph, is a demon. Yeah.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, they're cut from the same cloth.
Yep.
So let's go back to little Zane. How did you grow up and get into cars?
It was just something that was always around. My dad worked in the auto body industry pretty much. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think there's some photos. I was probably like 1.5 to 2, and he was going to like a community college to, back then in our area, you go through a program to get your apprenticeship card, and then you would also work in the field during the day and work towards your journeyman's card. So I was pretty young. I was like 1.5 years old, and he had to go to night class, and nobody could watch me, so he took me to class. So there's even a photo that far back somewhere of me crawling around inside a Model T or something that they were working on at the class at the time. And
so you're saying you were like the beginning of a service dog. You were your dad's service human that tagged along. Did you wear a vest?
Dog is fine. I drag my knuckles. It's all good.
So
service human, please don't pet.
So is this the Santa Rosa area, or is that where you always been?
Close to. I mean, we moved up. We were in Marin County. Actually really close to that area where that Frank Lloyd Wright, that big industrial or commercial building is that you see on the freeway. I know Tim's seen it. It's actually the county jail. it's a really cool area down in Terra Linda. Was where I started. We moved up to this area when I was, I think, 6 going on 7. Um, but like I said, my dad was kind of always worked in shops. Started a shop when I was probably maybe 9 years old. Um, and then that was in our hometown area. It was actually in Cotati. Um, and just it was just always there. And obviously, I mean, I know Tim knows this, but I started BMXing at an early age. I think I first started that we had a local track. I think it was 1977, so I was probably 6 going on 7. And then just always on a bike and always hanging out at the shop. And then my dad closed the shop when I was in high school, and kind of stayed in the same field, but kind of went to this whole training side. And um, but it was just always there. I don't ever remember a time not being around old cars. I got in trouble a lot as a kid. I think I spent probably 80% of my childhood on restriction. So
I would never have guessed that.
my mom got me a subscription to Hot Rod Magazine when I was probably 8 or 9 range, maybe 10. And I think since then I've gotten it, has had a subscription all these years. And so being on restriction, I just go in there and I just be glued to those magazines. And I was learning, not even realizing it. I was just, always tweaking out on the cars that interest me, and studying the photos, and kind of like Playboy. I didn't really read the words. I just looked at the photos.
I like the word restriction. So is that like grounding?
That's what they called it in the 70s.
Was like a restriction, like we called it, like my dad always says, I'm never going to ground you. If you need it, I'm just going to beat your ass.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, I probably got that too.
To me, restriction sounds like it was court induced. like the court says you must keep your child under lock and key.
It was probably court influenced. There were times when I'd screw up so bad. Like my old man would tell me, he's like, there isn't anything you're going to get away with. I've done it all, and I'd still have to try it. I mean, I'd remember coming home from school sometimes thinking like, oh yeah, I'm going to get home and get my bike. And I get home and that fucking thing was padlocked to the ceiling in the garage. And I knew. I was just like, shit. I just stayed in the house. Feared for him coming home after work that night or whatever. And
and sometimes he was probably like, I haven't caught Zane doing anything for a while, so he's obviously done something I haven't caught him yet, so he's under restriction again. Yeah.
Well, sadly, we grew up in that time where, like, this area was smaller, back then, and we lived in that time where, like, I get caught doing stuff, and I'm thinking, how the hell does he know this? Like, and it was just like, the neighbor would see me across town doing something stupid with some other kids, and then they'd probably drive by my dad's shop and narc me out. I mean,
yeah, my dad had eyes everywhere. Super small town where I grew up. But so let's talk about BMX racing for a little bit. How long did you race? I know you went to the Grands one time. I think you said Oklahoma City. I said we talk all the time, and that's kind of how we hit it off. We met at SEMA. I don't know what year. I believe Jason Rushforth introduced us, and then we went party hopping all night and just talked about everything, and just because we had the BMX background.
Was that the year that we went to that party? And it might have been the party that Carrie Hart was throwing, and you guys sat over in a bench by yourselves and just talked, and you looked like you were like hitting on each other.
I don't know if that was the year. I remember the one year Carrie Hart had a party at one of the places, and some reason, because I knew Heath Pinter, I got to sit like behind the velvet rope in like with the Carrie Hart and his buddies, because him and Heath were buddies. And Rushforth walked in, and he's like, how did you get back there? I was like, I don't really know.
I just remember, I don't even remember the name of the club, but I can see it.
It's like the Rainbow or something like that.
And it was just you and Zane back there in the corner.
That was probably a different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's probably.
But anyway, back to your BMX history.
Yeah, your BMX stuff. And you still got your original bikes, too.
Yeah, I have a few of them, yeah. So started here locally. We had a track in Santa Rosa. And then that's probably one of the reasons why I got in trouble a lot as a kid. I was hung out with guys that were 2 and 3 grades older than me.
And at that time, BMXers, we're still in BMX. It's a different, now the good kids are like, they're jocks. They train, they take it really serious. Back then, it was like BMX and skateboarding were for the misfits, the hellions, the kids that didn't really fit in a lot of the other stuff. I mean, yeah, some of us played, that's hard to believe, right?
Are you saying that
Some
Zane
of them,
wasn't a jock?
I think Zane was a jock, though. But that was my point. Some guys still played football and did baseball and track and stuff like that. Like BMXers were usually good at track because they could run and jump and do all that other stuff. But
yeah, I did other sports, but I would say by the time I got to about 11, BMX kind of became the priority. In our area at the time, we had the track here in town, and then there was one not too far from here over in Napa, which I think Napa still has their track or a version of it.
yeah, Donnie Robinson runs the beginner league over there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I had some relatives that lived in Sacramento area, and in that area at the time, there was at least 8 to 10 tracks from Roseville, Placerville, Grass Valley, Stockton, and then you could go further, deeper in the valley of like Merced, Modesto. There were tracks everywhere.
Yeah, you could probably, if you were serious, you could almost race every day of the week. I mean, I lived in the Midwest, in Illinois and Iowa. If you were serious, you could race 4 or 5 times a week if you raced 2 sanctions, and that's in the middle of Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like Friday. You could go. It was pretty common for us as I got more serious, where when my mom got off work Friday night, we would head probably to Stockton, race under the lights, then drive from there to Sacramento, which is about an hour. And back then there was just tons of motos. So, we'd be there till midnight, jam up, get to my aunt's at like 1 a.m. And then we were up early and heading to Grass Valley. And then, Roseville might be doing an afternoon race. And then we were back in the Bay Area at Moffett Field on Sunday. I mean, it was really common that my mom would hustle me and a couple of buddies around to 4 different races just in a 3-day period. And some of those bigger tracks like Stockton had national events and a lot of double and triple points races through the state. And so I was really fortunate that, my mom would just load us. I mean, I remember we'd pick up, kids that I'd race in the same class with, and we'd pick them up in Oakland on the way to Stockton or whatever. And my mom used to drive a 64 Lincoln, and we just pack the bikes in the trunk. And, and then it's because my dad worked and had a shop, my mom always seemed to have different cars. One year it was the Lincoln, the next year was a Blazer, and, just random, but there was always room for 3-4 kids and bikes. And then you just be stuck together for the weekend. And so that kind of evolved quickly. And then started to get to go to more like national events and, primarily West Coast, because there would be one over in Reno, Bakersfield, Stockton. We'd go up to, up into Oregon for different races.
What was your first race bike that you had?
My first race, well, that very first bike I raced, or
yeah,
I started on a Schwinn Stingray that was hot rodded. It had moto mags. It was heavier than hell. I had racing bars and a little pro neck on it, and I wasn't on that bike long, and then I kind of quickly merged into a Mini Ripper. SE was pretty new at the time and pretty big on the West Coast, and I thought they had a cool logo, so I liked their bikes. I wasn't on the Mini Ripper that long. I was almost probably too big for it when I got it, so I think I only raced that for half a year maybe, and then I kind of saved up some money and I bought a quad angle frame and fork set. And I never looked at it this way back then. It wasn't until more recent years where we were talking BMX bikes. I think I was talking with Steve Strope about it, and he had the perfect analogy. He's like, we were building hot rods when we were BMXing, because we would we would like these wheels with these hubs and these cranks with these pedals, and I like these colors, and you could really kind of customize the bike your own way. It was a lot of individuality in BMXing back then.
There's actually a lot of us guys, our generation, like you said, Steve Stroke I know Jesse Greening raced a little bit, and drag
Like,
racer Larry Dixon and Foose raced a little bit.
Dave
They're
Tucci.
actually going to do a thing at the BMX Hall of Fame Museum on the storyline of like known hot rod builders getting their start in BMX, and I'm going to help
Oh,
work
that's cool. That's
with that
cool.
display. Yeah.
Yeah,
So is that
there's
the SE you
definitely a
still
lot
have?
of people in this industry that you find out that are BMXers, and especially from our age group or maybe
Yeah.
a little older, a little younger, which is bitching.
So is that the SE that you still have? Is that a quad angle in your?
Yeah, I still have the quad.
Okay.
And the parts kind of would go from one bike to the next. So I raced the quad for a year or two, and then I stepped, kind of then upgraded myself. I got a profile. And same thing, parts went from the quad to the profile with a few new parts. And then I get, over the years, you end up with random things. I remember my dad took me to a race, and it was like a last minute deal, and it was I think I had my bike apart because I was working on it, so we threw everything in the car, and we went to like Arizona or something, which is like a 12-hour drive for us for a pretty big event. And I get there, and I forgot my cranks. They were in the garage or something. So my dad and I think at the time I had Boss crank. Oh no, I forgot the star that your sprocket goes to.
Mm-hmm.
And I had Boss cranks on my quad angle, and so it just worked out. My dad had to buy a whole set of cranks, because there would be vendors at the BMX events.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad had to buy a set of Boss cranks so I could get that star. And then we got home, changed everything back, and went into the box. And then something like 30 years later, I'm going through crap, and I've got basically NOS 180 millimeter Boss cranks in the box with the old credit card slide receipt deal with my dad's name in the box still.
And I have seen these in person. He's not telling a story, and he would not sell them to me.
Boss was made in Oakland, which is local to us, and it's all wrapped in like Oakland Tribune newspaper and stuff still. It's pretty cool.
See, I rode Patterson's as a kid in the 80s, and that was a NorCal company.
Yeah.
I mean, they had other people make them, but they were based out of Hayward, which they still are. They run
which is all the same area. I mean,
yeah.
So were you a factory kid?
Yeah, there was a lot of. What's that?
Were you a factory kid?
No, I was never that good.
Oh, come on.
Did you ride for a bike shop or anybody?
Yeah, local bike shop, and
yeah, that's what most kids did. That's what I did. I was just good enough to be on a local bike shop, and so how long did you just race 20-inch? So we talk about BMX a lot, and we have coming up.
I always wanted to race cruiser, and just could never get it together, or just have enough money to have the bike. So it was always 20-inch. I went from the profile. And my last bike that I raced, it was actually a handmade frame and fork set. There was a guy who's a couple years older than me down in the Bay Area. He was always I think he was in the Santa Clara area, because he was always at the Moffett Field track. This guy's name was Lonnie Lyerly, and he just had the coolest bike. And his older brother made it. And at the time, his older brother was living down in Southern California somewhere. And, I I was 14. I didn't pay that much attention. And I guess his brother worked at a hot rod shop and was starting to make these bikes. And I want to say I got like the third or fourth bike that his brother made. I remember waiting forever for it. And I mean, it's totally early 80s. It's turquoise and splatter painted and hand lettered, pro engineering. And it was cool. It had like little billet rear dropouts that bolt onto the frame, and little cutouts in the head tube, and it was sleeved with aluminum, so you could see brushed aluminum through the headset and stuff.
Yeah, they made some small run frames. I remember that name, and they were always playing with something else, little, like you say, custom dropouts, and like they do a run of like a handful. It seemed like then they change them because they could do that because they weren't mass producing them.
Yeah, and it was neat. It was like the first time I ever bought a bike like that. And, I thought I just wanted it because it was cool looking. But when I got talking to the brother, he asked me a few questions on like, how I wanted the steering and some different stuff. So it was like a huge kind of another step in learning. And he set it up for me where it had kind of a short rear and a steep head angle. And it was a really squirrely bike. It was quick. It was, if you were up on the back wheel, there was a sweet spot, and it was so short back there, it would just shoot out from underneath you if you weren't on it. And it steered really fast. It was a lot of fun. I only raced that bike for maybe the last year and a half, kind of right that I kind of raced right up till about 16 and then just pretty much hung it up and started driving. And I was working on cars kind of already, a little here, a little there, before that I had a driver's license. And so the pro engineering, which I know you've seen in the garage, that's pretty much hung on the ceiling just the way I stopped racing it in 1985. Maybe actually no 86 because I didn't turn 16 till later that year. So I raced into 86.
Okay.
But
So
that was cool. I mean, I got to do a lot of different things. I got to go to like the first ABA Nationals in Hawaii. Went over with a group of friends, and one of the kids' parents. We went with them, and I think there was 3 or 4 of us. And I mean, some of the coolest memories, like riding your BMX bike around Honolulu, and that whole Waikiki Beach area, just terrorizing. And that's just what we did on those bikes. It's if you weren't on the track, you were just raising hell somewhere.
yeah, I still got great memories. From BMX, I still have friends that I met way back then when I was, before I had my driver's license. I'm still friends with today from BMX, and then I've still run in since we still do BMX. That we run into guys that are in the hot rod industry or the racing industry, and BMX is, I think it's the awesomest sport. So awesomest. So okay, so you're in high school now. What was your first car that you got?
Before I could drive or when I was driving?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Well, it seemed like I always had a car, even at a stupid young age, just because Dad had a shop, and that's all my dad ever drove was old cars.
So what did your dad have for hot rods?
Not really so much hot rods. He just has always loved old cars. I mean, it's kind of like I got Hot Rod magazine, and his magazine back then was Cars and Parts, and which was pretty cool back then. And I'd always look through his stuff, so I was learning about other European brands, and that was a really diverse magazine. And so my dad liked everything. Most of his cars were probably they were stock. They were just old cars. Like he had a 49 Plymouth Forever that was like a 2-door coupe that I think he got when he was 18. And I remember being pretty young, like, sitting on his lap and holding the wheel, going up the driveway, or the road, that kind of stuff. I didn't realize it. I mean, he always liked everything, but I think he's really kind of a Mopar guy. It's always what he seemed to have. He had cool DeSotos and what have you. I mean, he used to drop me off in junior high in a 56 DeSoto 2-door hardtop. And, being young, I thought the cars were cool, but even back then there wasn't, you get dropped off at school, getting dropped off in an old car wasn't a normal thing. And they were always kind of works in progress. And I kind of still remember it. My dad likes to remind me of it, where one day he was taking me to school, and I had him drop me off a couple blocks before the school. And it was just because I was just stupid, and I made some comment about, like, how come we don't have a newer car, or we always driving old cars. And
because didn't the Cunninghams on the Happy Days, didn't they? There was a 30s, but wasn't it a DeSoto? So did anybody call you Richie Cunningham?
No, I didn't get that.
Okay. So I know why we're talking about your dad here. Your dad, does he still have, or he had at one time, one of the Chryslers, the Mopars, it was actually in American Graffiti, right?
Yeah, it was a 56 DeSoto. Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore. He collected up a lot of stuff, and then just kind of got to the point where he wasn't going to get it done, and he offered it to me, and I already got too much crap on my own.
But Brian Stepsky drew an art. We were both featured in Rod and Custom as a handful of the builders pick stuff that you wanted to build, and we both picked cars that we already had, always trying to find that customer. And I have the artwork. I have it on the wall in the hallway. And it wasn't a famous car like the 55 or the Milner's car, but it was the car, if I'm correct, that Richard Dreyfuss was sitting on when the Pharaohs found him.
Yeah.
So was there really a scratch on the hood?
I think by the time he got the car, it was faded, and that movie was filmed locally for us.
Oh, how we know.
Yeah, we've been to Zane's, and Carrie's been there with me before. And Zane gave me the website. You can go to Petaluma and go to all the filming locations that they filmed there. And we'll talk later about Zane's rad kids. But Taylor actually worked security at the music or comedy venue that's right behind where Jerry's Cherry's used car lot was. So
Yeah,
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 yeah.
huge history up there in
That's
NorCal.
still an active business. We go to see. I mean, we went and seen Reverend Horton Heat there. I seen Jimmy Vaughn there. I mean, it's a great establishment. It's just an old theater that they get some pretty good music venues through to still to this day. So yeah, my son worked there for a while, and that lot that was where the cop car came out. That lot's still the same. I remember I took you through all that stuff, but
Yeah.
so because the movie was filmed locally, like, Paradise Road, all those things were stuff that we were on every day. It was
Mhm.
just, you didn't even think twice about it. And, then fast forward, it's, such an iconic movie, especially if you're, a car junkie and you're in the trade and what have you. So
Mhm.
because it was filmed locally, all those cars were local cars. Um, it's hard to catch in the movie, but there's a really cool red 40 pickup it's parked right next to the DeSoto in that same scene of the movie. And the guy that owned the truck in the movie still owns that truck to this day.
Oh wow.
So, and he got to be on set, and he's got some neat pictures that he took when he was there. So he actually gave me some pictures that I'd never seen before because just the camera angle in the movie is different. But I've got some pictures of Richard Dreyfuss and the DeSoto with his red truck in the background. And
Mm.
um, you went and saw the 50th in the movie theater, right?
Mm-hmm.
For American Graffiti, you went and saw
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That was cool because I haven't seen that movie so many times. There was stuff with that on the big screen and detail in the movie that I could never really see before on a
Yeah.
TV screen. So um, yeah, most all of those establishments and cars are from this area. And um, so yeah, my dad had that car for a long time. He used to sit in the corner at his body shop and never did anything with it. And it's just, it was a big car and I got too much crap and it just went down the road. But um,
You
he
should
had
you
two,
shouldn't
he had
say that
two of
you
them.
have too much crap, just in case Steph listens to this.
Oh, she knows. She
We
knows.
all know.
Okay, so what your first cars? I interrupted you about what your dad had. Your first car before you got your license and what you first started driving in.
Yeah, so I think the first car that was truly mine, I was probably about 11 or 12. He got me a 66 Barracuda. I had gotten hit in the front. So, my job was to start taking some of it apart and he was going to fix it and it never got done. Um, I lost interest in it pretty quick. And it's one of those things too where it was like, Cudas were cool, but I would have rather had a 66 Charger than a 66 Cuda or a 68 Cuda versus a 66 Cuda. But nevertheless, I started fooling around and you learn how to take stuff apart. And um, I don't even know what happened to that car. He probably traded it off for something else. And then, um,
Probably to get you off a restriction with the sheriff or something.
no, I think the next car then was a 56 Chevy, a two-door hardtop. I had a RM 125 that I blew up and it sat around the shop for a while and he ended up trading the bike and gets this 56 two-door hardtop. And at the time I was probably, big on wanting a 55 Chevy like an American Graffiti. And, he shows up or I show up at the shop and he's got this 56 and my response is like, it's not a 55, But same thing. We had that for a number of years, and then
I probably
as
would
he
have
got,
put a little smart ass on restriction too if he was my kid.
yeah, I probably got restricted for that, or at least slapped around or something. But I think when I got close to the driving age, that was like kind of became the big mini truck era, and Volkswagen, at least on the West Coast, Volkswagens were huge at the time. Um, so before I could have my license, we picked up an 82 S10 that got rolled over, and we were chopping the top. And I think I also, at the kind of around the same 6-month period, I got a 64 VW convertible that, probably had a little damage, and we started working on, and, it didn't even have a license yet. So we start these big, monstrous projects. And by the time I turned 16, they're nowhere near to be done, and I needed something to drive. So I ended up getting a little bit newer of a mini truck, and we actually finished that one. I could drive and work on that one at the same time. And I had an 87 Mazda that was, it had gotten sideswiped. So we changed, the fender and the door, and it was an extra cab, fixed the cab, but did all the normal stuff of the time. I shaved all the door handles and tailgate handle and painted it all one color. And that was my high school truck. And just out of high school, I think I was trying to sell it, and weird timing. I was working at a shop in high school and just out of high school before I went to community college. And this guy would come into the shop every day, and he knew me and my dad were into Willys. And he hands me a want ad from a San Francisco Chronicle, and it said the guy was selling a 40 sedan delivery Ford and a it was listed as a 41 Willys station wagon, and I wanted $25,000 for both of them. And this is like, maybe the summer of '88. And so I was trying to sell my truck, had a little bit of money saved up, and it was kind of bugging me all day. I kept thinking about that ad, and I called my dad. My dad was working down in the Bay Area at that time, and told him about it. He's like, well, what do you think? He's like, you want me to go look at it or call? And I said, yeah, let's find out about it. So he calls the guy, and he had to meet him in a bar. It was down in Fremont. And so he makes my dad meet him at a bar, and basically he's getting interviewed about the car to make sure that it's not going to get cut up. Mm-hmm. And never said anything about the year, and at that time we had just learned about, that they made supposedly 5 1941 Willys station wagons at that time. That was the only thing we'd ever heard about. And so my dad goes and meets him at the bar, and then he takes him to a self-storage unit in Fremont. And he rolls the door open, and there's no cell phones, there's no nothing. I'm waiting for my dad to get home. I can't wait to hear about the car. And he gets home and tells me, he's like, man, he rolled open that door, and he says my jaw hit the ground because and I didn't know until he got home that it wasn't a 41, it was a 40. And we had never, at the time that it was only known that they build them in 41. There was no 40s even known about at that time. And this thing was 100% original. It had 52,000 miles on the odometer, and original paint. And
how many did they make in 1940?
Well, at the time it was that, might have been the only one. And then we heard there was 3. And then later on, it kind of found out that there would have been as many as 5 and 40. It's definitely in the sales literature from that year. Mm-hmm. But, back then that was like the Volkswagen. That was the economy car for America. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what their sales numbers were, but to buy a station wagon, that was a big price increase over like a cheap coupe. So needless to say, I had to work out a deal with my dad because I didn't have the money, and I was trying to sell the truck. So I took everything that I had saved, and, he gave me the rest. And then when I sold my truck, I paid him back. And, I end up getting this 1940 Willys Woody. I'm 18 years old, and
wow,
it's kind of like I knew what I had, but you really don't know. And I remember we picked it up. It took us a week or two to get it all together, and we went down and picked it up, and it was an interesting experience. Like we're loading this thing, and it was like the longest day of my life. The guy had so much crap in the storage unit, and it was like one piece out at a time, and he's got it. It was cool, some cool stories with it and stuff, but you could tell he was just having a hard time selling it. And mm-hmm. by the time we got it loaded up, the guy was in tears. Aww. And he was the second owner, I was the third, and he found it totally by accident. He overheard a young guy and his dad having a discussion in the auto parts store about Grandpa's car, and he didn't want it. He wanted a Toyota pickup or something. And so he kind of butted into the conversation because he heard enough to find out to find out more. And The original owner, it was neat. I got original bill of sale. The guy traded in a Model T. It was bought right here in Oakland. This was about 60 miles from us. And I think it was the guy's second car because it's had such low mileage. And a lot of those homes in Oakland almost have like basements for garages. And he had spray painted. He actually took the original canvas on the roof and put a fiberglass coating on it. And he did this in the 40s. Put a fiberglass coating over it and spray painted that and all of the wood silver. So it was horrible looking, but it's really what preserved the car. And I think I had that car for, 14 or 15 years. Yeah, maybe a little less.
And is that the one you end up restoring for Dick Long?
Yeah. We when I had it, I got it running, got the brakes working, and got it to where we could kind of drive it around. And really what it became is just a couple times a year we would take it out. And I'm in my maybe early 20s at this point, and a group of us would always go down to Good Guys Pleasanton, and that was a lot different back then. There was an area where the cars would line up at like 2 a.m. to wait to pull in and get a spot to park, and along at Pleasanton, alongside that area where everybody would line up, it was just a big grass field and a lot of motorhomes and trailer parking and stuff. And we were probably, I don't know, say the ages of like 20 to 23 or 4 maybe, in that timeline. We would go down, we'd load it up, haul it down there, and we would just show up and throw up tents, and there'd be 10 to 20 of us just partying, having a blast, and we'd pile in this car and drive in the fairgrounds, and it was cool. You just watch people's jaw hit the ground, and I met a lot of neat people because of it. People wanted to buy it or trade it, and at that time I thought, I'd never sell this car, and as I ended up selling it to Dick Long. That's how I met Dick. Is we had Steph and I had saved up some money, just put a down payment on our house. We weren't even moved in yet, and I'm thinking it took everything to make that happen. And I'm thinking I'm going to be eating peanut butter and crackers, and we're going to hang sheets up to cover the windows because we didn't have money for blinds. And
what's wrong with peanut butter and crackers?
Sounds like our daily life right now.
Yeah. I still like it, but. So it just, I met Dick, and then it's like, oh yeah, the car's not for sale. And then you go home, you start thinking about it, and it's like, well, it could make a little bit of a difference. And thought about it for a little while, and called a couple friends that were older and really knowledgeable about hot rods and stuff in our industry. And
so you're saying they were wiser?
There's always somebody wiser. Just to get some feedback on the value, I kind of thought what I thought it might be worth. And of course, a lot of people didn't think it had any value. And so I was able to put a price together, and Dick jumped right on it, and it was good for me and Steph. And it allowed us to put curtains up and kind of have a house payment that, you could still make when times were tough. And that's what cars have always kind of done for me. I probably have started more projects than I've finished personally, just because, mom needs a new car to drive, or, kids were doing sports and different stuff. And
screw them kids.
So is that car, is that one of the ones, is that in the Lions Museum now in their Willys collection?
Yep, it's in the Lions Museum now, yeah.
So you sold it, how long, we're going out of order here and we got to go back again, but how long did Dick have it before you got to restore it for him?
It wasn't long. When we sold it, so I had the car, 14 years roughly. Maybe less than that. I don't really remember at this point, but when I took it to him, I dropped it off. I had said something to him along the lines of like, I've always been into Willys. Me and my dad are in them, blah, blah, blah. And if he ever had any interest in restoring it, I'd love to be a part of it. And he knew it, at that point, Dennis and I were Creative Concepts, and our shop was up and going. And he, less than a few months later, I get a phone call at the shop, and he says, "Hey, this is Dick. Cindy and I are in the area. Would like to stop by and see you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay," and didn't really think much of it. And they showed up, and that was the first time I had met his wife, Cindy. And he said, I think I'd like to restore the car, but I'd also like to build a hot rod version of it as well." And that was the coolest thing ever for me at that time. I mean, like, having that car, that's the kind of stuff you dreamed you could do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so now is getting that opportunity to do that with Dick and Cindy, and it was really kind of just go for it. You know, he kind of let us just take control of it and call the shots and restore that car at the level that it deserved. And
some of you guys don't know who Dick and Cindy were. They were awesome people. I went to their place with you a couple times.
They still are awesome people.
Yeah, I haven't seen them in a long time, but
they didn't become assholes.
Well, yeah, but like their collection was so good. It was one of the stops on the Hot Rod Week. Their Good Guys stops. It was always a tour stop, and they had an amazing collection and one of the most beautiful chunks of property and houses and overlooks and just what dreams are made of. What he had, it really is. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he put together a really neat team of people. There was, I think he amassed maybe 24 to 26 cars. I want to say we did 10, maybe 11 of them. I think initially when we started on the Willys restoration, and then, starting the build for the hot rod version, before we were done with those two, the next thing you know, I think we had two more going for them. And so it was a lot of fun. Did a lot of diverse stuff for him, some mild hot rod restoration stuff. I would say the Willys Woody and the 37 Cabriolet were probably the two most radical cars he had. And he grew up in Oregon, but, his childhood was 1962 American Graffiti. So, he had artwork done, really unique artwork done of scenes of like American Graffiti in his little museum that you went to. But it was cool because he would put his friends and their cars into those scenes. So they had Mel's Drive-In, and then there was a drag race scene, and then a little city cruising scene, and it was bitching.
All right, so let's go back to where do you want to go back to?
When him and Steph started dating.
Oh, okay. How did you guys meet? And so how did you meet?
We met in high school. I think it was right before my senior year, and started dating, and we met.
Who asked who out first?
Was she your high school sweetheart?
Well, I was in high school, yeah.
Did you ask her out, or did she ask you out?
Before that, but shit,
Did you ask her out?
I don't remember.
Because we learned from Alan and Angie Johnson. Angie kind of asked Alan out before him.
It was probably more her asking me out, but we met through mutual friends, and back at that, we were like the tail end of cruising. So the cruise scene was still pretty good at that time in high school. So there was, young people out with cars, and in our area we had, the mini truck guys, the lowriders, the 4-wheel drive redneck guys. There was a little bit of everybody. So, we just met through some mutual friends, and, that's kind of probably how it started.
So she's seen your vehicle, and she's like, ooh, I need to date that guy.
See, Carrie only wanted to date me because I had a cool vehicle, and when I wrecked my truck the week before, she almost didn't go out with me when I showed up in my mom's Beretta.
Well, I guess I'm the lucky one then, because I had primer spots all over mine. Mine wasn't quite done yet when we met, so I finished it shortly after we started dating, and so
she knew at that point that she could fix you up.
Yeah, the work in progress all around here. Yeah,
right on, Steph.
Yeah,
yeah. I think she gave up on that one.
So, is that where you wanted to go? That was my go back, and then I have a next one, but it's out of school. So, what did you want?
Mine
to
is out of school too.
You out?
Did you graduate?
Yeah.
I'm just
And then
checking.
you-
I mean, you were always on. What was that? He was on.
Well,
restriction.
that's the funny thing. So that was the changing point for me. Is I was always in trouble, on restriction a lot. Um, there were some pretty good BMX events that I missed because I got my ass in trouble.
So you saying Steph straightened you out? I think I got in more trouble when I started being around this one.
No, it was the driver's license. That was the magic card that my parents had on me. It was like my grades were always really mediocre. I probably should have flunked the first 8 grades for sure. But in high school, like my freshman year was like the first time I, didn't do good. Where not doing good enough made me. I had to do some summer school and stuff and make up a class. But it was the driver's license thing. My parents had me then. They were like, these are the grades you need to maintain in order to have a driver's license. And that was pretty important. I was already going downtown and cruising with guys that had driver's licenses. And, I'm kind of working on a truck or different stuff. That was the goal, is to get down there and cruise. And so it was like the type of thing I had to have, A's, B's, and C's in order to get a license.
What did you get an A in? Art?
Initially,
Or wood shop?
nothing. No, it was it's kind of like one of those growing up moments when you realize your parents were right about something. And so all of a sudden I had to start putting the work in at school to get the grades in order to have a driver's license. And they also dangled a carrot. They told me if I got, straight A's, they'd pay for my gas and insurance.
Axel wants to show you his butthole.
No, come on.
That's the real camera there.
We're going to lose our... You're going to be censored.
Axel's taking stills with the camera.
Yeah.
Hey, this isn't Only Cats.
Only cats.
So honestly, what happened was almost like a light switch. I just started doing the work, and in a couple of months' time, I figured out like, wow, it was actually easier to just do the homework than the amount of work that I was putting in to avoid the homework.
It's like a learning moment right there. Did you hear that, kid?
That was a game changer. So my last. I guess that was probably my junior year, because I didn't turn 16 until the fall of my junior year. So late October. So I was already a couple months into school by the time I got my, before I could even get my driver's license. And then when I graduated, I was 17. So it was kind of cool. Like my parents gave me like kind of a year off after I graduated. I actually graduated with really good grades. Turned it around enough that school actually gave me a couple of local scholarships to use towards junior college. And I had interest in like architecture at a pretty young age. So like in junior high, my like science fair project that they make you do or whatever, I built like a house out of like balsa wood and stuff, and like it was built partway into the ground because you could be energy saving, into the earth or whatever. And and I had to draw it up and do the whole thing and have the backboard showing my drawings. And then in the high school, like my freshman and sophomore year, I got into mechanical drawing and kind of did as many of those classes as you could. And then art was next, and I never thought I was really good at any of it. I was kind of felt I had just like worked really hard to be mediocre, but it was kind of at that time I, probably was starting to, you're trying to figure out what you want to do after school, right? And still didn't really, I kind of had an idea, but still wasn't figured out. But my parents gave me like a year because I was only 17 when I graduated. And so I just went to work. I was already working at a shop, and all they did is old cars. It was kind of a hot rod shop. This is now like.
Was that your first job? Was it that shop?
Yeah, it was my first job. I pretty much, in high school, they had an ROP program. So you could take like, your last 2 classes, so your 5th and 6th period, you could get out of school or go take, a woodworking class or whatever. And they had ROP auto body. But for us, we had to go out of the Cotati area and go up to Santa Rosa. That was where the school was for auto body. And I had a friend in the same grade, but he was almost a full year older than me. So he had a driver's license and he was a mini truck guy. And so I was able to take the class, but I had to have a ride up there. And I was there, I don't know, maybe the first semester or first quarter. And I showed up one day and the teacher's like, "Hey, you're going to have to go to work in this shop." And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, you know too much. We're just going to put you into a shop as part of the program." And he told me the name of the shop, and it was just a regular collision shop. And I was like, "Nah, I'm not really interested in any of that. I just like old cars." And there was a shop called Pilgrim's Custom Body Works that I only knew about. I didn't know anything about it or him. But I'm like, if I'm going to go into a shop, I want to go there. And he's like, "Well, we can't do that. That's not part of our, in our, what they have for options." And I'm like, "Well, the other problem is I don't even have a driver's license yet, so I still have to come to school every day with Tony." And so about the time I got my license, or shortly after, and they knew because they could see me driving to class at that point. I showed up one day and he's like, "Hey, you're going to start going to Pilgrims. We got you in there." So I went to work at Pilgrims, and it was neat. It was just old cars. He didn't do any collision work, and it wasn't really even an industry back then. And around here, it was the only place you could go do something like that. So I worked there 6 months or so, and it was just miserable. I was sanding Bondo from one end to another on like a 59 El Camino, and I always had an interest in painting, and so I'd kind of just bug him like, "Hey, why don't you let me paint something, like, because I know what I'm doing or something." And it's kind of like just getting to, after about 5 or 6 months, I just wasn't really enjoying it. And one day I showed up, and so mind you, I was still in high school, and I'd go the first 4 periods, and then at lunch I just bail and I just go straight to work. And I'd stay. Technically you could leave at like 3 o'clock or whenever school is out, but he had the first couple hours for free, and then he would actually pay me to for the rest of the day, and I'd stay to work till 5 or 6 or whatever. And so started there and hated it. And then one day I showed up, and there was only a couple guys that worked there, and I was like, "Hey, what am I doing today?" And he hands me a gun, and he's like, "You're painting today." And I'm like, "What? Where's Robbie?" And he's like, "Robbie doesn't work here anymore. You're painting today." And literally I had to go in, and there was a 57 Studebaker in the booth ready to seal. And I had to seal it and shoot it. And this was lacquer. So it's like lacquer was still around, and they were transitioning more into like base coat, clear coat systems at that time. But I had to go in and paint this thing black lacquer and put a green pearl coat on it, and then a lacquer clear coat. So my very first job was a complete tri-coat. So that was kind of pretty much the beginning of that. And it was neat as I messed up a lot of shit working there, and I would feel really bad, and I'd stay late and go in weekends and fix stuff and go home and complain to my dad that I didn't get paid hardly anything. And he'd just say, "Look, how many guys your age are doing what you're doing and learning that?" And meanwhile, like all the guys that, well, not all of them, but a lot of the guys that I knew that were into cars and maybe body work and stuff, they had left and gone to Wyotech. And I was there working and making money rather than going to school. And at that time, I don't think Wyotech there was no street rod program or nothing. So I was like, well, this is cool with me. I'm making money and having fun. And so about a year, my parents kind of gave me that year, just to kind of goof off and work. And I think I worked 6-7 days a week. And, it was just all about anything I could do to make money and learn and put, gas in the tank and go cruising. And so now I'm 18, and my parents kind of give me an ultimatum of like, "Hey, you can keep doing what you're doing, but you're going to have to start paying rent and paying for some bills, or, you can move out and do it on your own, or you can go to school and you won't have to pay rent or anything." And I'm like, well, that's kind of an easy option. And so I thought I was going to continue to work there and go to school, and he was kind of changing his business, and he took on a partner, and I ended up just kind of leaving altogether. And then they moved to another town just south of us. Actually, the shop was in South Santa Rosa, and they moved down kind of down closer to Petaluma. And and I just, started at school full time. But I kind of kept doing it. I needed a way to make money, and I had friends with trucks, and they'd want door handles shaved or ground effects kits painted and stuff. And so I had a place here locally, a friend of my dad's that I could use. So I'd go there on my off days. And during this whole timeline, I was building a Volkswagen, started the Volkswagen when I worked at Pilgrims. And then I had taken it home and was trying to work on it at my parents' house and still go to school. And my dad was working in the Bay Area. And so the days when I was in college, the days that I had off, I was really fortunate. I was able to take the Volkswagen down there, and I'd go work on the Bug on my days off of school, but I'd have to drive down to the Bay Area to do that. And I'd just get up early and go to work with him type of thing. And gotten the Bug painted, and had it at a local upholstery shop, trying to get the interior done. And, I made some seat brackets, and I'm trying to drill holes in it to mount the seat. And there's this old guy over there watching me, and he comes over to me later in the day, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you bring those over to my house tonight? I got a drill press and I can help you." And I was like, "Oh shit, why would you do that?" And he's like, "Well, you've been kind of fighting this all day. Let me give you a hand with it. And plus I got a car I want you to look at." And he had a 36 Ford Roadster that he had just gotten painted from one of his buddies, old time local hot rod guys. And there was a guy around this area, Bob Punt, had a body shop out in West County, and a well-known guy. And Bob had painted this car for John. And he's like, he wanted it cut and rubbed. So, I said, "Yeah, this would be cool. I can help you do that." But I had a limited schedule, because I was like, I had a schedule where I would go to the community college like on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So I had like Tuesdays and Thursdays and the weekends where I could go work and stuff. And so I went over there, and I don't remember how long it took, but I would cut and rubbed it, and then he'd say, "Well, hey, why don't you stick around and help me put it together?" And so I would do that, and I thought it was kind of coming to an end. And one of the last time or two I was going out there, he had bought a 40 Ford convertible, and this car was literally cut in half. And he had it sitting on sawhorses and stuff over off to the side. And he says, "Hey, why don't you just keep coming out here and you can help me with this thing?" And so this is great. Like, I had a place I could go do quick little jobs for my buddies, on the mini truck stuff or Volkswagens. And I'd go to John's place 2-3 times a week and help him on the 40. And we ended up taking it, when it was time to paint it, we took it down to where my dad was at in the Bay Area and used the booth down there. And that car is kind of how I met Ron Mangus years ago. I mean, we weren't even in business yet, and the car got painted, and we took it down there. And kind of jumping around a little bit, when I worked at Pilgrims, that was like my first probably real exposure to the Oakland Roadster Show. They had a car that they were building for a lady. It was really cool. It was a chopped, sectioned, and channeled 39 coupe. And it was kind of built after a well-known car from the early, the little books called, I think it was called the Bonneville Flyer. And they made some changes to their, to make that car their own. And it was really cool. It was painted in like, it was black with like this custom mix candy, with pearl. I mean, it was just this beautiful, like eggplant colored coupe. And, I think I was still in high school at the time. I had gone one other time to the Roadster Show, and I know it was 86 because I went with a friend, and I didn't have a driver's license yet in 86. I turned 16 later in the year. And back then at the Oakland Coliseum, you'd enter and you'd walk the carousel and then kind of work your way down to the main arena. And there was a car there that ended up winning that year, but I just still, vividly remember seeing that car and it just all the bitchin' roadsters on the main floor and stuff. And then it wasn't but a couple years later that I got to go with Pilgrim, and that was, going on setup day and then kind of go into the show through the weekend and then being down there for teardown night. And teardown night in Oakland was legendary. It's something that can't ever be replicated. It was, there was so many Harley guys from Bob Drone and Ron Sims and Arlen Ness. I mean, all those guys were Bay Area guys, and hundreds of bikes at the show, along with all the roadsters and customs and just a little bit of everything. And there's like was downstairs where like the main 2 floors were, and to go out, they had to kind of go out this one way, and it was kind of like, we called it the tunnel, but it was just kind of like a cement wall, and they would come up onto the parking lot, and it was just so loud, and all the Harleys was just come out of there ripping and sideways, and not OSHA approved in any way, shape, or form. Lines of people were the barricades and stuff, and it was the coolest thing. I mean, if that didn't get you hooked on wanting to be there every year, I don't know what could. So that was like my first really participating in a way. Was that car was really well along by the time I started there, but I was little, helped more on the tail end, and then got to go to the show, and so then I had, while we were there, I was working on the Volkswagen and stuff, and then.
Did you still have your mullet at the time, or was that mostly high school?
I would say I was more transitioning at that time.
Careful how you say transitioning nowadays.
That's why I said it that way, Tim. In high school, I was a long hair rocker, and then, my dad made me cut my hair because I had to join the real world. And so I kind of went from like long hair to semi-long, and then got enough balls to cut off more, and kind of went for the flat top mullet. I mean, the transition.
Hey, hold on just a second. When that's doing that at the top, is that okay?
Yeah, I had one. Can't deny it. There's pictures and proof.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, go back. Go ahead. I was interrupting. Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, so the Roadster Show, and kind of jumping around there, but was working on the Volkswagen. Got to go with those guys in the 39 Coupe, and then while I was in college, I started helping John with the 36 and then the 40, and by the time we were finishing the 40. Some of his friends were coming by, and they had some early Ford hot rod stuff too. And next thing I know, I had like 3 or 4 jobs to do and help guys with. And at that point, I had, my career path was automotive design. I was trying to get my art skills, better, and doing it here locally at the college, and mostly focusing on art and business classes for whatever reason. Meanwhile, I'm doing these cars, and I'm getting ready to finish school. And now all of a sudden I got, 2, 3, maybe 4 cars to work on for guys. And I'm like, this is kind of fun, and I had made some trips down to Pasadena to visit Art Center, and you start hearing stories about when you graduate, if you get a job, working for Honda or somebody, you start out designing door handles and what have you. And I'm thinking, I'm 19, 20 years old at this point. I'm thinking, screw that. I got better ideas than door handles. And I'm having fun, working on cars, and especially old cars. And so that's kind of how the business thing started. There wasn't a place to go work at that point. And I was, I had to make a decision. Like, I knew what level I wanted to work at this point. And for me, I would have had to maybe move to Southern California and try to get a job at a shop that's well known for doing that type of work, or try it on my own. And of course, everybody thought we were crazy because it wasn't something that was strong in our area. And my partner Dennis, we were pretty much the same age, and I heard that he was doing the same thing, and he heard that about me. And and as doing it by yourself, it's a lot of work, and I didn't really want to have to go through that on every car. And I thought, well, we call it kind of, I don't remember who called who, but it was like, hey, what do you think about teaming up and doing some jobs together? Maybe we can get them done a little quicker. And so we worked together for about a year before we got even actually officially opened up the shop. And we had a couple places through our clients to go work. And so we were trying to, get some cars done and make some money and find a place to rent and get it off the ground. And is June of 1993, we started officially with Creative Concepts, and, had a very small shop, but we're able to fill it with, 4 or 5 cars. And
And at that time, weren't you guys in like a shed at an apple orchard or something like that?
It was actually a really cool shop in an apple orchard, though. Yeah.
Okay.
We could put 5 cars in the shop. It was set up really good. There was like 5 doors, 5 bays, and it was an old building, but it had burnt down. So they had rebuilt it just a few years before we got there. So it was a really nice new building, all sheetrocked and insulated inside. And the last bay on the end was taller. The ceiling, it was just like the cement step down. So it had a bigger door, taller roof, and a drain in the floor. And that's what we ended up turning into our first paint booth. We were able to wet the walls and everything down to keep the dust control down. And it was a private orchard, so there was never a lot of like people driving by all the time and stuff. You couldn't see us from the road, and we were there for I think the first 6 years, and then we were kind of way outgrew it, and
did anybody ever call you guys the Apple Dumpling Gang?
Probably called us much worse than that.
Not until you did, Tim. Thank you.
And Dennis was here probably the first, I don't know, maybe somewhere 12 to 14 years at the most.
Yeah, when I met you, it was like, I don't know how long ago, but
Forever.
he never really went to SEMA with you. You guys were still partnered then. And like the first time I come out, he was there then, the very first time I came out. Because like some of you, I've been to Zane's a bunch of time, and I didn't come out. I didn't come out.
Oh, you went to California.
With the transitioning guy. But I went out to help Zane. And I've probably been out, I don't know, a bunch of times. But he was still there then. And I kind of remember he was kind of big into the...
That was kind of becoming the end, he just lost his passion, his interest for it. And
I kind of remember that was big when the bikes was, and he kind of wanted to do more bikes. That's what I kind of remember. And you're like, I kind of want to do the hot rods. So
yeah. And that could have been part of it as well. And, we did in that timeline. And before that, we would do a ton of bikes, and, bikes to me were great. They're just so easy to do in comparison to a car. And, I could knock out a paint job on a bike in just a few days and start to finish. And we were doing stuff. Well, that was one of the things that helped us get into the new shop, is we were doing stuff for Indian Motorcycles when they kind of came back, and we were painting sheet metal for them. And they had a big facility, and they couldn't keep up. They had their own paint department, but they couldn't keep up. And so they outsourced to a couple of people. And luckily we were able to get that account for a while. And we were doing, for a better part of a year or two, we were doing 10, 12 bikes a week for Indian. We'd have extra sheet metal, so we'd always have to get a jump. And, every Monday they would give us an order, and the following Monday we'd have to have 10 bikes or 10 sets of sheet metal down there in whatever color they needed. And it was a lot. It was hard. We had kind of almost a small crew for that. And, one day I kind of come in, and we've got cars, that we were committed to, and we were working on them, but not to the attention that they really should have been getting. And that kind of, for me, was a turning point of like, I love bikes, but I just didn't ride them. And outside of motocross or something, and BMX and some dirt bike stuff, I didn't really ride on the street. And I loved Harleys, but just wasn't my thing. And so I really just decided, like, we don't need to do as many of these. And we started.
Were you in this shop by then?
Yeah, we were in the same shop, but we've been in this location now for 25 or 26 years.
Okay.
So, because I think we're in the 32nd year now. I think coming up in June we'll be starting our 33rd year.
Yeah, this is my 30th, and I know you had 30th anniversary stuff
last year.
22
years ago.
Yeah, this is as we record this is the start of 2025. So 24 was my 30th, 23 was your 30th.
Yeah.
So we kind of glassed over the Volkswagen. I didn't mention that, but I know it may be hard for people to believe, but Good Guys used to give was of the year, Street Rod of the Year, Street Machine of the Year. They gave this big cup, and it used to give money in it, like $1,000.
Yeah.
They used to do the Volkswagen of the Year and Zane had won that. And you have the big cup for
Yep.
Volkswagen of the Year.
Why is that hard to believe?
Technically,
No, it wasn't that he won Volkswagen of the Year. That Good Guys actually beat Gary. Okay. If you didn't know Gary Metters, so I've allegedly been helped. Some of the builders they've asked at Columbus to go in the building when they lock the building and kick everybody out to judge Street Rod of the Year and Street Machine of the Year. And I remember when Gary Metters was still around, he'd give his say for his top 5 for the Street Rods and wouldn't even go to the Street Machine side because he was a street rod and he liked customs. But he knew those people needed to be there at his show. That's why he was one of the first of those big show series to allow the newer year stuff. But yeah, he was a hardcore street rod guy.
Actually, when Good Guys did Volkswagen shows, it was Mark. That was Mark's deal.
Yeah.
I didn't know Gary then. I just knew Mark because, we were doing Volkswagen shows, and Good Guys had, I don't know, they had a really big event at Pleasanton, the same one where the Hot Rod Show is. And then they started a few more. They had one in Vallejo, and they kind of had little, 3 or 4 shows that they did Volkswagen wise. And they started that I think they had the Volkswagen of the Year award before they had any of the hot rod stuff, really. At least what we know of it now.
And this time you were doing a lot of ISCA stuff with that car too, right?
Yeah. So Good Guys Volkswagen deal, they had what they called the pro show or the pro level, and then they had like the amateur. I don't remember what they called it, but there was 2 of the year awards for Volkswagens. And we were kind of put into the higher category just because of the level that the car was. And for the record, technically Steph won. It was her Volkswagen. So her name's on the big cup.
Okay.
But yeah, so I started the Volkswagen project. We were probably only dating a couple years at that point. Was working on it at the shop that I was at, Pilgrims, and then finished it up at the place my dad was at in the Bay Area. And
wait,
actually,
so you built Steph a car before you were married?
Yeah.
That's why she married him.
Right? Now I get it.
Yeah.
Did you get paid for that car, Zane?
For working on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to get paid a lot back then.
Back then.
Carrie hasn't paid the labor bill on her Corvair yet.
I'll never pay that bill.
Interest is running, man.
Never be able to afford it.
Yeah.
So there was this 2-year period roughly where I was in school. We hadn't started a business yet. That wasn't even on the forefront. And I got the Volkswagen finished. And again, the Oakland Roadster Show was always a big deal, and it was right here in our backyard. And we started out going to Volkswagen shows and then did well enough with it that we took it to the Oakland Roadster Show in like 1990, I think it was 90 or 91. And then back then Don Tognati had the show, and there was a fair amount of shows. There was probably 8 or 9 ISCA type shows you could go to just in California, Nevada area.
Yeah, they used to run a lot of shows. We got, I think he comes up, we're saving his till after Zane goes, but we did Bob Larrabee Sr., 94 years old from ISCA and Championship Auto Shows, and we've done Daryl Starbird. And like the ISCA used to do like 200 shows a year. That's crazy when you think about it. Big shows, small towns. Yeah, multiple shows going on in different parts of the country at the same time. And yeah.
I mean, for us, that was the Pacific Division. That was about as far as I could travel. I mean, you've been out here. I mean, California is such a large state. You could drive all day and not even leave it. But, I lived at home. I was still in school. I had this car that we built and was doing work for people and making a little bit of money. So it gave us the ability to, take off and do a show for a few days. And, when we showed that at Oakland, I was 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started going to some of the shows. We did Sacramento Autorama, and, for being a Volkswagen built in, chrome and paint underneath and stuff, there wasn't a lot of that. And the car would win, its class at those shows. And the surprising thing, like, here I am 19, 20 years old, and the car's winning paint awards at those shows. And that was kind of like, I met a lot of neat people. That's how I met Ermi Amerso, and I had no idea who he was. Had no idea that he won America's Most Beautiful Roadster, and he was there competing with the Twist at the time that we were there with the Volkswagen. And here's this guy, he looked like a pig farmer in his overalls, kind of standing back and checking out the Volkswagen and when we're setting up. And I saw him, but I was just working and setting up the display and cleaning the car and all that crap. And he'd come back and then leave and come back again. And finally later in the day or something at end of setup, he walked over and introduced himself and asked me why I didn't have Thunderbird exhaust on the car. And again, I had no idea who he was. And and that was kind of the beginning of a neat friendship with a guy like Ermi. And I think that year, back then at the time that we showed, Oakland was a 5-day show. You would set up on Tuesday and it would be open like Wednesday night, Thursday night, and then all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday type of thing. And so, and we were only 60 miles away, so I would go back and forth, and I probably still had school and got the car set up and had school one day in between, and went back to the show one of the days, and Ermi invited me to go to some luncheon with them. And I was like, oh, okay, nice old guy. And I had, this is only the second time I'd really, third time I'd only really been at the show and we're participating. And what he invited me to was the Hall of Fame luncheon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was neat because it was, at that time, there was a lot of guys were still alive. Ed Roth was there and Tommy the Greek was there and Von Dutch. I think Von Dutch was there. I remember it was one of his rare appearances, and Stan Betts and all these guys that you would read about, again, remember going back to being on restriction and reading the magazines and, so I was just like blown away. It was like the neatest thing I'd ever seen. And, and that was probably one more thing that just got me, hooked on it. And,
yeah, you're like me. I was talking to somebody on the phone today, and I was talking to Penny Pichette from West Coast Customs, and how some people, like even our age, they don't know the history of this. And that's another thing that we click on is you're a history nerd too, of all these guys that came before us. And you got to respect these guys, because if they didn't do what they did, we probably wouldn't be able to do what we're doing now.
Absolutely not. I mean, and it's kind of neat. There's been a few guys along the way that you get to meet and, have some friendship with and stuff. And it's nice to kind of be able to thank them too for that. And, again, being the age that I was and starting to meet some of these guys at that time, and I wasn't even in business yet. That was just the kind of the beginning of those types of things. And, at that time for me, I was definitely more naive to the, industry was pretty young in a way. Being a West Coast guy and being so close to Oakland, I was probably more hyper focused on that because that's what we knew. It was in our backyard. I didn't learn about things till like Detroit Autorama and the whole other aspect of ISCA, and until we started actually showing the Volkswagen and then some of the people that you'd meet, and they would travel the country. Ermi was one of those guys, and you start to learn about other names like Larrabee and Tom Daniels and
Chuck Miller,
Daryl Starbird, and some of those guys obviously you read about. And that was another neat thing that happened when I worked at Pilgrims. He would always talk about the little pages, the early magazines. And one day I was working, and he showed up with 3 big boxes stuffed with those little pages. And he said, take these home and study. And when you're done learning, you can bring them back. Keep them as long as you want. And I would just, go home at night and be glued to those things. And he also had another thing hanging in the office that I just could never stop staring at. And that was the Robert Williams painting, the Devil with the Hammer. just
So
those
tell
images.
my wife where your copy of that is hanging.
Well, it was in my bedroom for a long time, and now it's in my daughter's room, which is now my room.
Yeah, my wife won't let me hang mine in the house.
What? I have never. Okay. Let him. I don't let him do anything. We both are free range adulting. Free range.
I didn't know I was
husbands.
free.
You are free.
It's
You
on.
are
This is
way
being
free.
recorded, Carrie.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, you're in your own world.
Okay.
There,
Sorry.
dear.
Anyway.
Back to Zane and Steph.
So you know the safer thing here is I am going to side with Carrie.
Because she's cut from the same cloth as your wife, and you're scared of this one too. Yeah.
Thank you, Zane.
So yeah, we got to do some ISCA shows. The Bug did really well. It ended up winning like the sport compact class in that division. So we were like a Pacific Division top 10 car, and we went to Vegas for the Pacific Division Awards. And I was 20 years old. I couldn't go into and I wasn't really much of a drinker, but I couldn't. There was places I couldn't even go into because of my age. It was such a weird thing to experience. But stuff like we would go to shows, and you're hanging out with people that are older, and they would gonna go to the restaurant and the bar and stuff after the show, and I'd end up in the bar hanging out with these guys, but they wouldn't serve me or whatever. And but it was just cool to be able to do that till the late hours and hear their stories. And that car also got invited to go to Blackie's show, so I got to do that at a really young age with the Volkswagen. And it just introduced me to so many people, and Don Tognati and Rick Perry that ran those shows, and got to know Blackie really well. And even 1 year, I know you know this already, but Tana Northrup used to show, well, Tana Mank now, but she used to haul Ermey's car all over the country, and he got to know her, and we became friends. And
which Ermey's car, did it win the AMBR once, or the ISCA championship twice, or something like that?
Oh God, I don't remember all that. I remember he won. He had that Orange 32 with the Arden motor and won, and then the following year he won with the track T, the twist.
That's on display in the Museum of American Speed in Lincoln, Nebraska right now.
Right. So he won back. I think he was the first guy to win back-to-back with two different cars.
Yeah, okay.
And then he did win a second time with the twist, but there was a year or two in between.
Which one was the twist?
The golden. I call it the twist. I guess it's the Golden Star.
Okay.
The twist was the 32, I think.
Okay.
The Golden Star, and he was trying to win a third time, and I don't think could ever get it. But we got to know Tana, and we're all doing the show stuff together. And Steph actually went and did a couple shows out of state with Tana and just helped. And we went down, and Tana had to get to Long Beach to get Ermey's truck and trailer in the car to head to Texas or some series of shows they were doing. And so I had to get Steph down there. So we jammed down to San Pedro and stayed at Ermey's house and crashed on the floor. And again, I think this is like 1990, maybe 91. And it happened to be Father's Day weekend. Never thought anything about it. And I got to go down and see Ermey's shop where he had the cars and the Bonneville cars and where they worked on it and stuff. And he had a bitchin' little blue Model A Roadster, and they were working on it. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm taking it out tomorrow for Father's Day, LA Roadster Show." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know anything really about that." And so we went to his house and crashed on his shag rug and got up the next morning to go home. But I detoured over to Pomona to go to the LA Roadster Show, and again, it was just another one of these events that just floored me. At that time, the amount of roadsters and vendors and everything in swap meet and stuff that show was just.
See, that's one event is on my bucket list that I've never been to. I've never been to the Father's Day show.
And it's changed over the years, but I mean, it just left an impression with me. I mean, that's the Oakland Roadster Show, and that show was just like, I was put a fork in me. I was done. It was it was all about roadsters and early hot rod stuff for me from that point on. And
Speaking of
you know,
Ermy, I was been cleaning and changing my office and desks and stuff, and I found a big decal. Must have been like a door decal or something that Mank actually gave me of the Thunderbird
Thunderbird
products.
products. No,
Yeah,
that was a cool logo.
I need to get it in a frame so it doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, that was always a cool logo.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and got to see a little bit of Thunderbird products when we were down there, and of course he made me change the exhaust on the Bug. It ended up having a Thunderbird on it, um, but it was cool. I mean, just being around him, he was always very kind to me. Maybe it's just because of my age, and he introduced me to guys that were everyday, well-known SoCal hot rodders that he grew up with, and guys that we read about, and it was always just a casual introduction, but being young, it left a big impression on me, and at that point now,
Me and
it's
you've
kind of
had this
evolved.
conversations before. It's like that generation of guys. I grew up going to a lot of lead sled shows and stuff, and rod runs out in the Midwest. But the custom guys like Starbird and Winfield and those guys and Jack Walker have always been so welcoming because when they see something in that next generation, they want it to continue. And luckily, you had that around, the hot rod, street rod guys out that way. And sadly, I don't know many kids when I go to like little cruise-ins and stuff like that. I know like two kids of my buddies' kids that are around and into hot rods. They're just and they don't really want to work on them. The one's
Right.
working his way to be a professional photographer and goes and travels. He's just 16 and goes shoots Form of the Drift events. And I always thought maybe he'd be my part-time buddy in the shop, but I mean, he's got a 94 Mercedes station wagon, and that's a vintage car to him
Yeah.
because he's 16. I mean, it's a cool car, but I kind of thought that, hey, he'd be my guy I'd have, but it doesn't look that way.
Right.
So after the Volkswagen and you're running Creative Concepts and you're in this building, you did you talked about building a bunch of stuff for Dick Long. And then you changed the name to Cotati Speed Shop. So let's tell some history about Cotati and the racetrack and stuff that was around Cotati.
So there was two different tracks at two different times. It was all before my era. But growing up in Cotati, you always heard, some of the folklore and stories about it. Some of my buddies that I BMX'd or got in trouble with on BMX bikes or whatever, their dads, had a car, or, there was always somebody that with a similar situation. Their dad had a car, or a couple old cars, and, they were, BMXing like I was. And so you'd hear these different stories, and, so I always kind of knew about it. And, so back in the late teens, so like 1918, 1919 range, they built a board track, which was a super speedway. It was a 1.5-mile oval. It was part of the Indy Circuit League at that time. So guys like Barney Ofield and some of those well-known drivers of that era came to Cotati and raced. But it was a very short-lived track. It only made it 2, maybe 3 years at the most.
Yeah, the board track racing didn't really last long in racing history, did it?
No, it was short for a lot of different reasons. I think, in the Midwest and other regions, you had weather issues, and that was really hard on the tracks. You had better weather here, but what happened for Cotati is at that time there were no bridges, so there was no Golden Gate Bridge. There's I think 7 bridges in the Greater Bay Area, and there was none. So anybody down in San Francisco or south of San Francisco, they actually had to take a ferry ride across the water to get to, kind of the Marin County, which butts up to Sonoma County, and whatever road you call it a highway, it was a dirt road then. So they had to drive then 60 miles for where the Golden Gate Bridge is now to Cotati to see this big deal race. I mean, motor racing in that era, that was the golden era. That was such a big thing for automobile industry enthusiasts. I mean, race car drivers were as important as Hollywood celebrities, on that level.
Race car drivers to me are still more important than Hollywood people.
Yeah, I'm just a lot of people don't know that era of racing, but it was very important to you know automotive industry, and it was glamorized, and it was a lot of deaths, and it was barbaric racing. And but what happened is they ended up building another track down in the Bay Area, and they couldn't get the spectators at the same level they got the first season or two, because that was the Cotati was kind of the first one in the greater area. And then they built, I don't remember which one it was, but they built one down in the South Bay, and obviously it was much easier for people to get to, because the bridges weren't built until like, I think they started like construction like 37. I think the Golden Gate Bridge opened in 38. Bay Bridge was right in about the same timeline, 37, 38. So that made Cotati Speedway very short-lived. They tore the track down, and there's a bunch of well-known structures, barns, and different things built around the area that was from the lumber of that track. And then later on, we had
How big were the board tracks? How big around were they? I kind of forget.
This one was 1.5 miles.
Oh crap!
Yeah, I mean, in the degree of banking it was like Talladega. I mean, it was gnarly.
And a lot of people died on those tracks too. They were very dangerous because they were very fast, and the tire technology wasn't there, and just a lot.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why it was short-lived. And
man, that's a lot of wood. That is a lot of wood, man.
Yeah, there's some stat on like the linear foot, like how many times just the lumber at Cotati could go around the globe or something crazy. But then during World War II on the Pacific coast, so everything from Washington all the way to Mexico, there were all these airfields built to secure the Pacific coastline and protect the Pacific coastline. And so you had all of these naval air bases and what have you built, and a lot of them were used for training as well. And one of the first ones built in our area was in Cotati. It was a really, really big 2-field with like a particular cross to it. And I think right after they built it, they found out that they realized they built it in a flood zone. So it was a place that during the war was only kind of used seasonal. And then they built another airfield 7 miles north in Santa Rosa. So they kind of had two active bases really close. And then after the war, they kind of get shut down, and the land's given back to the city or the area. And for whatever reason, all these guys come back from World War II, and street racing was going on. And really the, hot rodding had already birthed, but it exploded when those guys came home from the war. And, to get guys off the street, and, young guys were dying, and just bad stuff happening. That's right at the timeline that there was the birth of the NHRA. The local people were able to get Cotati organized for and used for, local racing, and they'd have weekly events. And, it was this big greater effort probably across the country to get these young war vets off the street and drag racing, and doing it in an organized fashion. And
he's going to the wrong food. Our automatic cat feeder is going off. Sorry.
So it was, and then we had some neat stuff happen there. Like Jane Mansfield was the first well-known trophy girl to come through the area and hand out trophies at some event at Cotati, and it was used for drag racing, early SCCA road racing, and a lot of early like cafe bike racing. It had a lot of neat history on of its own. And so growing up, I hear bits and pieces, and then got a little older and started finding out more and reading about it.
And by the time you're growing up and you're into all this, that they weren't still running drag races there, were they?
Now that all stopped in like 68, 69. So really right before I was born, because they built what was called Sears Point, and now it's known as like Sonoma Raceway.
Oh, okay.
And it's still an active track. It just, that's where they kind of all that type of stuff moved to. So when I was a kid growing up in the 70s, where the track was to get people, like the track closed and people were still going out there. I guess I was pretty young. So they would take and dump big loads of dirt. And so there was all these like mounds of dirt, probably 8 feet tall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we would go out there and take our parents' shovels and rakes and stuff, and we would go out there and build jumps and make little tracks. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were out there kind of BMXing and goofing off where those guys were racing at the time.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and kind of on that side of town, that side of town is on the other side of the freeway for us. There was a skateboard park built in, I think, 77, maybe 78, and it didn't last long either. So, that kind of was like, I was already doing a little bit of skateboarding too. And so we kind of had both. If we weren't skateboarding, we'd ride our bicycles with our skateboards to get to the skate park. And then when we were done there, we'd go across the street or down the road and start jumping and goofing around on all the big mounds of dirt where the Cotati Raceway was.
Yeah, so when you wanted to change your name of the shop after the split, it kind of, Cotati seemed like a natural fit.
Yeah, it didn't come automatically. It was something that, as creative concepts, we were getting some cars done that were making, got some, they made it into magazines and stuff. And some of our customers wanted to travel. And so we got to go to some shows that were outside of our region at that point, and you'd meet other people. And I found it interesting. Like from the magazines, they would usually remember a car, or they would remember my name, but they would always not remember the name of the shop or kind of mix it up. We were, call us Creative Customs or Custom Concepts. And
I kind of remember there was a couple, like there was an East Coast Creative Concepts that had some cars and magazines, maybe not as much as you. There was like a few Creative Concepts, and then like you say, Creative Customs, Creative Hot Rods or whatever.
It kind of made me realize that the name was a little bit generic, but at the time it was just the fit that we had. And so, the name change was kind of something that was already in the back of my mind. And I played around with different stuff. And for me, I never wanted to be named after a person, because this is such a, as it just takes an army to get this stuff done. Even though like you work by yourself, you still have people you rely on, whether it's glass shops, upholstery, or whatever. And it's such a group effort. That's why to me, the name was always more of a collective effort. But after trying to work on different names and ideas, that's when it kind of hit. We have such history of our own here. There's so many pockets around the country that have their history. And if you weren't from this area, a lot of people didn't know about Cotati. And, we were fortunate because at one time, Cotati was owned by Andy Brizio and McClellan. It's at Champion Speed Shop. And so, Andy was a flag guy at Half Moon Bay and Cotati. And, so a lot of the, and unfortunately, it was just the thing of the times, but all the magazines were really West Coast influence early on. And
the Cotati track was called Half Moon Bay?
No, it's two different tracks owned by the same people.
Okay, because I'd heard of Half Moon Bay, and I was confused there for a minute. Sorry.
No, it's like anything. The tracks changed ownership, and at one time, Andy Brizio and McClellan, they owned both of those tracks. So that helped. I mean, it brought bigger names and more racing to the area. And
we talked about Andy Brizio. We interviewed a guy from New Zealand, Greg Stokes. And he says the first time he came,
He's coming up in a couple weeks.
Yeah, a couple weeks. And he says the first time he came to California for Hot Rod, it was like Hot Rod Week. And he goes, I got to drive one of Brizio's cars. And he goes, I'm going to all these places with Andy and getting introduced by Andy Brizio.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, that'd be like if you were a mafia guy and getting introduced by John Gotti. It's like if you're in the circle, if the first time you ever come to America and you're in the Brizio circle, especially Andy, of all the stuff that he has done and did in this industry. And he's like, I was just so blessed. They got brought in to New Zealand for a car show and I got to meet him. And then they're like, oh, you need to come visit. So I did, he said. So sorry for the sidebar.
No, it's Andy is a pivotal guy in this for everybody that's involved in it to this day. And obviously around the world. I mean,
Yes.
He had a lot of influence on lots of people, and obviously a guy who's not even from the States, and had such a cool interaction with them. And me too. I being close to the Bay Area and getting to know those guys over the years, I got my own stories of Andy and do some neat stuff with him that, just stuff that you cherish. And it's just cool to be a part and do something, on a more personal level with the guys
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah, I say that a lot, that, like, we looked up to these guys, and for us to end up being friends with these guys, like some of these
Yeah.
legends that are still with us, I have their number in my cell phone that I call them, and sometimes they even answer.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
It must not have your number in there.
Yeah, they don't know who's calling. They think it's a spam. But like, I talk to Daryl Starbird every 2 or 3 weeks. I was on the phone with Penny from West Coast Customs today, and I was like, yeah, it's pretty crazy that. It's okay. So you're changed your name. When I mean, obviously we talked about the Dick Long cars; those made magazines, and like, you've been in I don't even know what your list is. I know I've got. You've probably been in as many as I have, like hundreds of magazines you've been in, and magazine ads and stuff like that. So we've been very lucky. You live by one of the best photographers in the industry, Mike Chase. So you go and get stuff shot, even if it's not going to be in the magazine. You get it shot anyway in case you want to do a poster or something just to document. So you're pretty lucky to be close to somebody like that. And he's a hell of a cook.
Yeah, he is. I can't emphasize enough how fortunate I am to have grown up in this area, and just the hot rod community that's just, it's everywhere, but what's here and what I got exposed to and who I've got to meet and call friends. And, when Dennis and I started, we had 3 guys that were pretty prolific in the magazine scene right here from Sonoma County. We had Mike Chase that you mentioned, David Featherston, and also Mike Bishop, who was a great technical writer, did a lot of feature stuff too, but he was one of the early American Rodder guys, and he built that bitchin' AV8 Roadster with Vern Tardell, and they did the book way back in the early 90s.
On my end, the feed kind of fluttered a little bit. What did he build again? Say that.
Mike Bishop and Vern Tardell built that really well-known AV8 Model A Roadster.
Okay.
That they did a book on it, and a lot of build-up articles in American Rodder, and so all those guys are from here, and having access to them, and I met Featherston when I was 19, 20 years old because of the Volkswagen.
Yeah, I think I met Featherston 22, 23. He shot our 54 at the Street Machine Nationals. He'd come out that, and I knew him till he passed. We went visit him when he was starting out feeling good. Yeah, I went to his house. He was a cat guy, and he helped my career a ton when he worked for Flowmaster and a bunch of other stuff. So he always got us in magazines, Japan, Germany, Norway, all kinds of stuff. He was a great guy too.
Exactly, and to be able to get to be friends with those guys, and there was a lot of years where when my kids were little, we were always invited over to a Christmas party at Featherston's, and and those they kind of become it's part of your family, and when my kids were little, Mike Chase and his family used to do a deal on Christmas morning where they would go out and cook breakfast for local homeless people and give them clothes and stuff. And we started taking the kids out there on Christmas morning just to help them appreciate the things that they had. And it kind of became the thing where it was like they knew, and with this, what we were doing Christmas morning is spending it with Mike and his family, doing that stuff for a couple of hours. And
is that when you met Pryor? Was he a homeless guy that you fed, or does he just look like that?
No, Pryor was one of the first guys we met when we got started. And
what is Pryor's last name?
Passerino.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I met Pryor, I think, because of Pryor's dad. We started doing a little work on his dad, Buzz's Roadster, and got to know Pryor, and then just again, like, Mike and Pryor and David Featherston, all these guys are, like our parents' age, and so they grew up, I mean, with everybody. I mean, Mike was close personal friends with Andy and Roy, and knew all those, knew Roy when he was little, and um, so getting to know those guys, then hanging out and going to shows with them, and we're just getting started and getting the opportunity to meet icons of our industry and guys that you looked up to, and um, kind of jumping around on that stuff. Rod Powell was a guy that, another West Coast guy, not really from our area, but
I'm trying to get him on the podcast. I have Mark, because Mark hangs out with him a lot.
yeah.
I always mess up his last name. How do you say Mark's last name?
If I pronounce it right, I pronounce it as Delubia.
Yeah, I forget the extra in there. And but he was out with Rod Powell. I was like, man, see if he would do a podcast. I would love to get Rod Powell's story.
Mark will get him. Yeah, I'm sure Mark, if he'll get it done.
So why we're talking about Rod Powell, and I didn't learn this because I've been buddies with you for, I'm going to say 25 years. We've probably been buddies. Man, that makes us sound old, doesn't it?
You are old.
Hey,
and,
I'm gonna walk away for a second. Hang on.
He's like, man, I'm friends with Tim for 25 years. I'm
yeah,
gone.
He can't handle
I'm
the
outta
20.
here.
He just is he safe? Is he just like grabbing the electrical box or what? I'm not really sure what he's doing. So what can we talk about Zane? Why he stepped away from it? He's a dog lover. He has the little weird little wiener dogs, but they're not really. They're like Chihuahuas. I always hated Chihuahuas. And I used to go. He had this dog. He's got 2 other dogs now. His name was Tiki. And he was the coolest little guy. When he got excited, he could only turn left. We're talking about your dogs while you were gone. I was talking about Tiki. He could only turn one direction when he got wound up. So
right. So you were talking about Rod when I walked away. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell that story. I didn't learn this story till a few years ago. One of my top 5 customs is the Mike Young. 64.
Mike Young, Jimmy Vaughn, 60 Paula, yeah.
Yeah. Why am I blank on who built that car?
Gary Howard.
Yeah, the late great Gary Howard. And I didn't know until that car. I seen some pictures that Mark posted. So tell that story. I think that story is really cool. How you were involved in that car.
Well, I'll back up a little bit on the Rod Powell part of it. So. I was always a big Rod Powell fan. Loved his Flames and the cars, infamous cars that he worked on and was a part of. And so, we're just starting out. We got a name, no logo, no business cards, no nothing. And one thing that Dennis and I kind of always agreed on was we both loved Rod Powell's artwork. And we thought, man, it would be so cool if we could get Rod to design a logo for us. And again, when we started the shop, I was 22 going on 23. And, so I'm like, how am I going to call Rod Powell, and probably found his number in some old magazine ad or something. Mm-hmm. And so we called him and, kind of got enough gumption up to call him. And I'm sure Dennis, I think I remember making the call. So Dennis made me do it or whatever. And so we call and I introduce ourselves and, we'd love to get a logo designed by him and not sure if he would do it. And he seemed to show some interest in wanting to do it. And we get talking a little bit more and he says, where are you guys at again? And I told him the location of the old, where the old shop was. And he's like, I just moved to Sebastopol. I'm about 7 miles from you. and then he ended up coming by that day.
Oh, wow.
So he came by and we shot the shit and talked about some ideas and kind of what we wanted for a logo. And Rod,
I did not know this. I'm learning something tonight.
Yeah. So Rod designed our first logo. I still have the original artwork. And
how much did it cost for Rod Powell to draw your logo? I turned down and I kicked myself. Dave Bell, great artist, drew at Street Rodder and Custom Rodder. He was always super friendly to me. I have a signature from him on a poster. from the Roadster Show that he wrote that he was a big fan of mine, and he always offered to draw me a logo and a business card, and I never followed up. And then he passed away a few years later, and I kicked myself for not having Dave Bell draw me something.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, just another crazy fortunate thing for us, being able to get connected with Rod in such an easy way, and then him to show up that same afternoon.
The Strange Motion Way podcast, brought to you by Royal Purple Synthetic Oils.
Royal Purple premium synthetic motor oils and high-performance chemicals have been designed to improve performance in all conditions and provide cleaner operation, better mileage, and decreased oil change frequency. That means less oil changes. With products available for your gasoline and diesel engines, Royal Purple is the obvious choice for your performance needs. Drive with Royal Purple, the synthetic expert.